of a group called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Mr. Gage, what is that group?
We are a group of 2,200 architects and engineers, a nonprofit organization dedicated to finding out what really happened at the World Trade Center with the destruction of all 3 towers on that day.
And what do you have doubts about?
Well, the architects and engineers that I represent have found evidence that has not been told to the American people by the agencies tasked with explaining the destruction of these towers. Evidence of controlled demolition, particularly with the 3rd high-rise that collapsed on that day in the afternoon of 9/11, World Trade Center 7. We're looking forward to sharing with your viewers that evidence today.
Well, let's look at a little bit of video that your group has put out, and you can explain it after we see it.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that.
Now we go to videotape the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Mr. Gage, that was Building 7, Dan Rather narrating on CBS Live.
It sure was, and most Americans are completely unfamiliar with this. In fact, architects and engineers around the world, mostly all unfamiliar with the 3rd worst structural failure in modern history. I mean, here is a 47-story skyscraper. At 5:20 in the afternoon, it drops like a rock, and I mean this fast. Free fall acceleration, straight down, uniformly, symmetrically, as you saw. Now, a building with 40,000 tons of structural steel cannot fall straight down like we saw due to normal office fires, the official reason given us by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, without all 80 columns on each floor being removed simultaneously and then synchronistically timed floor by floor. So, Peter, we've seen this like the old hotels in Las Vegas, and as our viewers just saw, it looks exactly like a controlled demolition. But NIST tells us, no, this came down due to normal office fires. So you can begin to see the problem right off the bat. Normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper ever before. We have steel-framed, fire-proofed skyscrapers for a very good reason. And they have protected our towers for a long, long time. So the 2,200 architects and engineers that I represent around the world in over 300 presentations now in 32 countries and 82 American cities, they present the evidence for the explosive demolition. And that evidence is seen not only in the videos of the buildings, but it's heard by the first responders who cite the explosions in this building's destruction, who cite the pools of molten iron flowing like lava, they say. And in fact, Leslie Robertson himself, the World Trade Center structural engineer, cites a river of steel flowing. Now, these are evidence of temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Office fires can't even get 1,000 degrees short of that. So we have a serious problem, very serious, in the accountability under the official story of those extremely high temperatures and evidence of molten iron, documented by FEMA itself. In the first report, Appendix C, in the FEMA report, May of 2002, which documents hot sulfur corrosion. In fact, the author of that report, Jonathan Barnett, says the ends of the beams were partially evaporated. That takes 4,000 degree temperatures. The only thing that we're aware of that can create that is thermite. Thermite is an incendiary used by the military to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. And there are patented cutter charges that do just that with thermite. So this is why we have to have a real investigation that looks at the evidence that NIST has ejected from the report after they came in 2004 and threw away the FEMA report.
Now, Richard Gage, NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology, is it? I believe?
That's correct. Yes.
You're talking about their report. Now, you question the falling of Building 7, the way it fell. Are you questioning how the Twin Towers fell as well?
There are very serious questions about the Twin Towers. Once we look at World Trade Center 7, which most people don't know anything about, and see how obvious the freefall symmetrical destruction is, and how that matches exactly a controlled demolition, and how the official story cannot possibly be true, we're ready then, maybe, to take a look at the other subject that you bring up, the Twin Towers, with a little bit more of an open mind, because most of us feel like we know how the Twin Towers came down because we have been given the official story. Most architects and engineers don't even question the story that NIST has provided. When they do, however, see the evidence in the Twin Towers, like Building 7, they do end up agreeing with us by a show of hands, overwhelmingly, and many of them sign our petition. Again, 2,200 architects and engineers now demanding a real investigation. So that evidence is certainly available in the videos. For instance, of the North Tower, we're told that this upper block of 10 stories, 15 stories above the point of jet plane impacts in the North Tower, that upper block drove the rest of the building down to the ground. We have a few problems with this story, however. Chiefly, that's not what the videos show whatsoever. That upper portion is destroying itself before there's any downward motion to drive the rest of the building down to the ground. In the first 4 seconds, it's completely destroyed, liquefied, if you will. The structure is completely shattered. There's nothing left to drive the rest of the building down. And yet what we see after 4 seconds is exactly what the first responders are describing, hundreds of them, in the oral histories taken and documented by Thomas von Essen, the fire commissioner. They say, pop, 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 all the way around like a belt. All these explosions. They're describing explosions. They're hearing explosions. There are explosions throughout the building, yet none of these hundreds of eyewitness testimony of explosions are included in the official report. But what we see is, like they describe, a belt. All these explosions laterally driving 4-ton perimeter wall sections, structural steel sections, laterally 60 miles an hour in every direction, landing 600 feet away. Isolated, freely flying structural steel sections. This takes an incredible lateral force, up to enough force to eject or fire a 200-pound cannonball 3 miles. We also see explosions below that.
Mr. Gage, I apologize for interrupting. I just want to let our viewers know we're going to take a lot of phone calls, and we're going to begin that in just a second. We invited Mr. Gage on this program because from time to time regular viewers of the journal know that we get phone calls asking about Building 7 regardless of what segment we're talking about. And so we thought we'd investigate this group and give them a chance to have their say. And I want to start with this tweet, Mr. Gage, and it kind of goes to the why. And this is Jim at Lake Gaston. Who gains from this building falling? Why would someone want to demolish it?
I think criminal investigators who are trained at looking for suspects in such massive criminal controlled demolitions like these obviously were, have to be employed to look at the means, the motive, and the opportunity. Who benefited? Cui bono? These are the questions that enterprising journalists and criminal investigators should be asking, but in large measure are not, for whatever reason. The architects and engineers for 9/11 truth are tasked with the what. And those questions you ask, why, have to also be answered by those who are trained to find suspects with motives and find the motive too.
Let's take some calls. Mr. Gage, Max in Milford, Indiana. Please go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, C-SPAN, for having Mr. Gage on to tell the inconvenient truth about 9/11, because our whole foreign policy and much of our domestic policies today are all based on 9/11. And there are so many questions to be asked and answered about 9/11, like, where is the airplane debris at Shanksville, Pennsylvania? Where are the 4 black boxes from the airplanes? Why did the Bush administration fight an investigation? Why did the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 collapse? Why were military and political people told not to fly? Who scheduled the hijacking war games on 9/11? Where was NORAD? Who told them to stand down? These are just a few of the questions that need answering. Thank you.
Well, I agree with the caller. These are some serious and very important questions that Americans, millions of them, are asking, but not getting enough airtime. And we appreciate C-SPAN's dedication to journalism and finally focusing on this subject, because after all, 2 wars were started as a result of 9/11. We've lost 6,000 soldiers, 1 million people in the Middle East have been killed in these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've lost precious civil liberties through legislation, and our economy has been wrecked. If there's any question about what happened at the World Trade Center and the other questions the caller is asking about, then we've got to have a real investigation.
Richard Gage, next call for you comes from Alice in Morganville, New Jersey.
Hi, thank you, thank you, thank you. Everything you are saying is questions I have as somebody who worked there for 24 years and was there for the 93 incident. Nobody ever brings up Giuliani. We had Philippe Petit walked between the buildings, yet the mayor, the biggest mouth, never said after the first building was hit, clear out the second building. I don't care what size plane that they thought it was. Or with the president reading My Pet Goat. So please continue to investigate. I lost so many dear friends. I wasn't working any longer at the Trade Center. Thank you.
Richard
Gage. Thank you. I do appreciate the additional questions raised by the callers today. Of course, our focus is on the science of what happened. We want to know, how did 400 structural steel connections give way every second during the 7-second free-fall collapse of World Trade Center 7? Their computer animation that NIST made to prove how their theory developed, that is the buckling of column number 79 at the 12th floor where the worst fires were said to be. However, those fires were burned out over an hour before the building ever collapsed. So they could not have caused the thermal expansion that NIST cites as initiating this collapse. NIST also has a serious problem in fabricating evidence and not including key structural components in their computer model, which they will not release, citing that it would jeopardize public safety were they to release the computer models and the structural drawings for Building 7. In fact, the architects and engineers like us, who are responsible for public safety, have to have this information, of course, in order to ensure that public safety.
Now, Richard Gage, National Institute of Standards and Technology, after their investigation of Building 7, put out a full report, and when you read it, it seems pretty frank and open. In fact, they ask themselves questions, or they ask the questions and then answer them, such as, is it possible that thermite or thermate created to the collapse of World Trade Center 7? Their answer in here is to apply thermite to a large steel column. Approximately 1.13 pounds of thermite would be needed to heat and melt each pound of steel. For a steel column that weighs approximately 1,000 pounds per foot, at least 100 pounds of thermite would need to be placed around the column, ignited and remain in contact with the vertical steel surface as the thermite reaction took place. This is for one column. Presumably, more than one column would have been prepared with thermite if this approach were to be used. It is unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected either prior to 9/11 or during that day.
Well, the question, one of them, would be who would be detecting this? Of course, we want an investigation of the security company under whose noses would have to have been brought several tons of thermite, as a matter of fact. Now, the question, the answer is quite cute, actually, because they completely ignore the patented thermite cutter charges, which issue thermite through a channeled device, issuing in milliseconds molten iron cutting through structural steel. This is very well documented, and you don't just pour thermite against a column. It has to be contained and directed in cutter charges. So we'd be looking for that evidence. In fact, what we see, what FEMA documents, is molten iron. In fact, molten concrete as well, which takes 3,000 degrees of temperature. Where does that come from? It can only come from thermite, an incendiary used by the military, again, to cut through steel like a hot knife through butter. So the evidence is there for thermite, and patented cutter charges are, in fact, made with consolidated thermite. All that would be left is molten iron. And indeed, that's what's found in the basements of the Twin Towers and the debris pile under World Trade Center 7, and it was not included in the official report by NIST, comprising 1,000 pages of obfuscation and actually lies.
Next call for Richard Gage, Eric, Antioch, California.
Hi, I'd just like to say that I really enjoy C-SPAN, and there's been a lot of callers a lot of times that I've heard calling about this issue, and I'd like to thank C-SPAN for allowing this to come up, and congratulations to all the people's calls finally bringing it forward. And that's all I have to say.
We'll move on to Cologne, Germany. This is Sinan calling in from Cologne.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for taking my call, Mr. Gage. As we all know, there were many eyewitnesses, I call them crime scene witnesses, on that morning of 9/11. And indeed, it was one of the biggest crime scenes in history. I know you're not just only in contact with architects and engineers, but also with lawyers. What I want to know, once it comes for a new independent investigation, if it's just for Building 7 or all three buildings, would it be possible to consider such testimonies of, let me say, key eyewitnesses like Barry Jennings? As we all know, he survived explosions in Building 7 even before any tower even did collapse. I mean, isn't it just a regular procedure to hear crime scene witnesses?
Yeah, there are several witnesses, in fact, hearing explosions. Barry Jennings is certainly one of them. Unfortunately, he lost his life the day before the final report came out about Building 7, in which, of course, they deny explosions, which he was testifying to in several different films and on live camera. We also have Kevin McPadden, a former Air Force medic who was a first responder, who actually heard a countdown. 3, 2, 1, and then felt explosions under his feet. He said it was like you needed to grab onto something. He knows an explosion when he hears it. Other firefighters or policemen hearing explosions. In fact, we have policemen moving people away from Building 7 saying, the building's about to blow up, flame and debris coming down. Now, how do they know the building is about to blow up? Fires, which there were a few small scattered fires in this building, which again have never brought down a skyscraper, steel frame, ever. They're saying it's going to come down. They're expecting it to come down. In this case, they're expecting it to blow up. In the case of the Twin Towers, CNN and the BBC actually announced, in the case of the Building 7, CNN announced the destruction of that building in the morning, several hours before it came down. And in the case of the BBC, they announced it 20 minutes before it actually happened. They later apologized for this grievous error, citing the confusing events of the day. Something is going on here that needs to be investigated. Why can't we get governmental officials to investigate that? Every one of our CNN viewers today should be calling their congressmen and finding out, and senators, finding out why they're not investigating the worst mass murder in U.S. history and the third worst structural failure in modern history. This is absolutely an extraordinary and unacceptable situation. And that's why we have 2,200 architects and engineers all about this, all over the country.
Richard Gage, what do you do for a living, and when did you come to believe what you believe?
Well, I founded Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth 8 years ago when I heard on the radio another researcher, David Ray Griffin, now the author of 10 books on the subject, who delves, by the way, into many of the other issues that the earlier callers have brought up outside of the World Trade Center, which is our narrower scope of investigation. So I had to dedicate myself to this all-important task because I found that most Americans are unaware of the evidence. It's on the internet, it's available, it makes sense, it's comprised from the video testimony, the video documentation, the eyewitness testimony, and it's not something that's made up. We are talking about evidence that's capable of being brought into a court and standing up against the process, the legal process. So let's, like the other caller said, let's get it going. Let's get some effort, as we are, in fact, pursuing various legal efforts, including against NIST themselves for fraudulent building reports.
And back to the National Institute of Standards and Technology report. This is the question. An emergency responder caught in World Trade Center 7 between the 6th and 8th floors said he heard 2 loud booms. Isn't that evidence that there was an explosion? NIST answer: the sound levels reported by all witnesses do not match the sound level of an explosion that would have been required to cause the collapse of the building.
Yeah, they actually say it would be a loud boom, you'd hear it for miles, but what they're referring to is high-energy explosives, which are normally used to bring down high-rises, like the old hotels in Las Vegas, which we've all seen, which Building 7 looks exactly like. But if they used thermite, an incendiary, which operates by heat instead of gas expansion and force and loud bangs and bright flashes, thermite instead would be much quieter. But there would still be some explosions heard, which in fact were heard.
Laura tweets in, what do the 9/11 truthers think happened in Pennsylvania and at the Pentagon? Were they terrorist attacks?
Well, the researchers such as David Ray Griffin, who have looked into these matters, have found serious questions that also require a real investigation. And we're talking about a real investigation which offers immunity to bring forth witnesses, a subpoena power to force them to come forth, that looks at all the evidence with an open mind and with a scientific method. When we get such an investigation that we can actually trust, unlike the 9/11 Commission, by the way, which at least two of those members said that they were set up to fail by the Bush administration. One of them, Max Cleland, resigned, citing this as a national scandal. This is pretty extraordinary evidence. In fact, the attorney for the 9/11 Commission, John Farmer, cited that there was a decision at some point not to tell the American people the truth. The American people deserve the truth, Peter.
Mike, Safety Harbor, Florida. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, C-SPAN. First of all, Mr. Gage, I just want to give you the utmost compliment. You're a true American hero, and my hats are off to you. The very first caller was right when he listed the lengthy list of anomalies. The science for the destruction of the Twin Towers through explosives such as nanothermite is there. It's overwhelming. I personally have spent hundreds of hours of my personal time going over various information through Shanksville, the Pentagon, as well as the Twin Towers. Mike Rupert did an excellent presentation that you can pull up on YouTube where he actually goes through who would actually have benefited from the Twin Towers being brought down. He discusses topics of insider trading that went on that day through the various airlines. He talks about defense contracting. There's a lot of things that he touches on that have a lot of credibility. The one thing we need to stay away from is partisanship, because until we can prove who actually is involved, we should try to avoid dropping large names because it's counterproductive. Although I do believe the way you do, there's a lot of questions that the Bush administration needs to answer. My last question for you is, I was curious, have you personally or your family or anyone with the organization, have you had any threats, harm to your life or anything of that nature? And I'll take your answer off the air. Thank you very much for C-SPAN.
I'm delighted to say that I have not had any problems with threats, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I don't need that in my life. I'm just a normal, everyday architect and person who is very concerned about our country. As an American, I am deeply disturbed about the state of affairs when a deception on the scale of these three criminal-controlled demolitions can occur, and most Americans, certainly not all, fortunately, have been deceived. And most of our elected representatives are unwilling to tackle the very serious issues before them, such as the finding of nanothermite, which the caller mentioned, in the World Trade Center dust. Small red-gray chips, tons of them altogether, found by an independent team of scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, with nanoparticles of iron oxide and aluminum powder embedded in them. Very clearly the most advanced materials made in extremely sophisticated Defense Department contracting laboratories. This material should not be found in all the World Trade Center dust, and yet there it is, and unexplained by the official analysis of the dust samples by R.J. Lee and the USGS, which, by the way, also found evidence of molten iron in the dust, which cannot be accounted for by the official story. Of course, jet fuel office fires can't possibly account for temperatures exceeding 2,800 degrees. Office fires can't even get up to 1,800 degrees.
From the NIST report, some people have said that a failure at one column should not have produced a symmetrical fall like this one. What is NIST's answer to those assertions? World Trade Center 7's collapse, NIST says, viewed from the exterior, most videos were taken from the north, did appear to fall almost uniformly as a single unit. This occurred because the interior failures that took place did not cause the exterior framing to fail until the final stages of the building collapse. The interior floor framing and columns collapsed downward and pulled away from the exterior frame. There were clues that internal damage was taking place prior to the downward movement of the exterior frame.
Here's another one of NIST's cute answers to an extremely difficult question. You cannot have the interior of a 47-story, 40,000-ton structural steel frame fail without pulling in the side of the building and causing massive warpage on the exterior perimeter structural steel system. It can't happen. They're talking, once again, in their computer models, which betrays their own theory, that we have 400 structural steel connections that have to fail in their computer models in order to get that interior to fail, and then the exterior. We don't even have massive window breakage on the exterior. It can't happen. In fact, what does happen is the penthouse drops, the main penthouse, a half a second prior to the overall. So just half a second prior, the penthouse drops, then the overall building drops again. How fast? Free fall acceleration. That fast. 7 seconds. Total structural shattering of the entire structural steel system, beam from column almost. So this can't happen unless all of those are compromised. See, when you have a pile driver that's driving the rest of the building down, it's doing work. In this case, it's falling at free fall, meaning all of its energy is transferred to kinetic energy or motion. There's no energy left to do any work, such as driving the rest of the building down to the ground. That work has to have come from another force. Again, that force is most likely a thermite incendiaries, for which we have the evidence in the rubble pile.
John, Jonesboro, Georgia, go ahead with your question or comment for Richard Gage.
Yes, Mr. Gage, I have a couple of questions. Where did you get your degree in architect? Also, what engineering degrees do you hold? And I would like to personally know when your book is out. I've been a steel worker for 50 years, and I can assure you that all the centrifugal force and the downfall and this and that, if you put enough weight on a building, it's like, you got a paper building. You drop a 5-pound weight on it and see film crush it. So
yeah, well, I appreciate that. I went to you.
Just a second, Mr. Gage.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
I appreciate that. I went to the University of Southern California in 1986. I had my degree and licensed in 1988. A member of the American Institute of Architects, and we have more than 70, I think 80 now, structural engineers signed on. In fact, there are some high-rise structural engineers. There's several, at least a dozen, high-rise architects, experienced architects in these buildings that have attested to the fact that you cannot have a 40,000-ton structural steel system and not a paper building fall at free fall. I mean, we're talking about 80 columns. In order to have this building fall symmetrically, all 80 columns have to be severed virtually at once. You tell me, as a steel worker, how that happens, and I'll tip my hat to you.
Daniel, Atlanta, good morning.
Good morning. This is Daniel Bland. I joined the Army 3 months after 9/11, a decision that nearly cost me my life when a rocket-propelled grenade impacted 15 meters behind me. So first off, I just want to say, Mr. Gage and the 2,200 other architects and engineers that have signed this petition are heroes in my book. I'd also like to give a props to C-SPAN for bringing light to this important information. And I'd like to end with a question for Peter. Peter, it's apparent that you've been given these talking points from NIST, and you stated earlier you thought that their response was transparent, which to me seemed kind of a dance around the point Mr. Gage made about NIST refusing to release the input data used in their computer models. I would love to hear your comment and how you think that's transparent and how it serves the interest of truth and finding out what really happened so that we can end these wars that are killing innocent people around the world to this day. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Mr. Gage, 2,200 architects and engineers signed on. How many architects and engineers are there registered with AIA and these other groups? How many are in the U.S.?
What we found is that most of them, and I think there's about 80,000 in every one of them, first of all, are unfamiliar with the evidence, particularly World Trade Center Building 7. And this is the third worst structural failure in modern history, and yet architects and engineers are not familiar with it. So when we travel, we get them in our audiences, and just like lay people in the audience, they end up agreeing with us by an overwhelming majority. I mean, like 90 to 100% of them, when they see this building coming down, which, by the way, they can see also on our website, ae911truth.org. That's ae911truth.org, on which people can see the building coming down, and of course in the exact manner of classic controlled demolition. So the problem is, architects are expressing opinions, a lot of them, and engineers, before they see the evidence. Those opinions are uninformed. You have to see the evidence to have an informed opinion. When they do, they end up agreeing with us. I think that's extremely important. It's also telling, why are they not informed? Why hasn't other media outlets such as CNN, MSNBC, CBS, etc., shown the World Trade Center Building 7 to the American people? Why haven't the American Society of Civil Engineers and the American Institute of Architects educated their own professionals about the third worst structural failure in modern history? Why are they so uninformed? I think these questions are extremely important as well. We're doing our best, of course, but until we are communicating with the leadership of the American Institute of Architects directly now, and expecting to educate the 80,000 architects in the membership that I belong to. So I think that'll make incredible headway toward the problem that you're citing, Peter.
And Richard Gage, let's close with this question from Boring File Clerk. It's tweeted in. I've asked it once and will ask it again. What is your theory about what happened, and why do you think it happened?
The scientific evidence shows that incendiaries, and in the case of the World Trade Center Building 1 and 2, the Twin Towers, thermite and nanothermite and high-energy explosives, most likely, brought these towers down in an explosive controlled demolition. In the case of World Trade Center 7, a classic implosion. In the case of the Twin Towers, a very explosive event. This is what the evidence shows. It's very clear and overwhelming. And we're asking all Americans to first get informed, and second, and you can get informed at our website and with our DVD, which is called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. Just Google Experts Speak Out. It will come right up. And once people are informed, they can tell others, because this is a grassroots organization largely, operating because of what amounts to a censorship on the part of most mainstream media. We praise C-SPAN for having the courage to bring forth the evidence on this morning's show. But our effort is to educate the American people so that they can be informed, they can demand a real investigation, and then we'll let the chips fall where they may. We don't have a conspiracy theory. We're bringing the evidence. It's up to others to investigate and find out who may or may not have been responsible.
Richard Gage, founder, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Thank you for your time this morning.
Next, a conversation about conspiracy theories and their impact on national security. This is from today's Washington Journal.
Kurt Eichenwald is the author of a recent Newsweek cover story, "The Plots to Destroy America," about conspiracy theorists and theories that they believe in. He joins us now to talk about that story. And Mr. Eichenwald, why should those who don't believe in conspiracy theorists worry about those that do?
Well, because it's harming the country. I mean, we've gotten into a point that is very different from what we've experienced in the past, where you have actually politicians who are, repeating conspiracy theories, who are advocating conspiracy theories. I mean, just the other day, you had a member of Congress who was saying that, the Obama administration wanted the, children refugees from Latin America to come into the United States so we could perform medical experimentation on them. I mean, this is coming from someone who is an elected representative in the government. And when you have policy being shaped by fantasy, you end up with pretty bad policy.
And what are some of the conspiracy theories that you think are causing some of the most harm in this country right now?
Well, one of the worst is the conspiracy theory about Agenda 21. And, I can tell you right now, I said those words, and there are people all over the country reaching for their phones. Because what that one is a belief. Agenda 21 is a non-binding agreement that was signed during the original George Bush administration back in the early 1990s, in the UN, saying that the countries would were making a commitment to basically to care for the environment, basically to act in ways that preserved the environment, allowed for things in terms of planning, in terms of urban development, blah 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 blah. Nothing big. It's a non-binding commitment. This has become a belief in an overarching conspiracy of a new world order that is trying to seize private property in the United States, to grant trees the rights of humans, there are actually people saying they're going to shuffle us off all onto train cars and send us to work camps. I mean, it's crazy stuff. But when you look at it, there are zoning commissions in the United States, local county zoning commissions, that can't get anything done. You can't get bike paths built. You can't get, modest, normal zoning development done because people come out screaming that it's about Agenda 21. And, their zoning commissions. There's one I mentioned in the article where nobody in the zoning commission knew what Agenda 21 was. They had spent years on a zoning plan. They couldn't do it, and so they all resigned. Because it was, why do this job if we can't do it when we're faced with people who are talking about craziness?
And some of the other ones that you have concerns about fall into the health and health policy realm.
The big one are the anti-vacciners. These are people who believe that there is a vast conspiracy among the government and the pharmaceutical industry to hide the realities of the dangers of vaccinations. Anything you have has a danger. Anything that is injected into your body has a danger. The question is the danger significant, statistically significant, or is it significant compared to not having it? The anti-vacciners are, again, living in a world of these vast conspiracies that are hiding these vast problems that don't exist, that have been disproven over and over again. The problem is we now have a recurrence. Measles was almost completely defeated in this country until the anti-vacciners came along. Now measles is on the upswing because people aren't getting their kids vaccinated because they believe it'll cause autism or all these other conditions that there is no reputable proof that, that backs the idea up.
Are there definitions that we can lay out here? Where does somebody go from asking a legitimate question to becoming a conspiracy theorist?
Well, conspiracy theories work backwards. I mean, if you think about it, you know, an event happens, and you look at the event and say, well, wait a minute, could it be bigger than da, da, da? And if you're asking questions, actually asking questions to find out answers, you can find a real conspiracy. Conspiracy theorists take those facts and unwind them on the basis of an original belief. You know, take the 9/11 truthers. You know, these are the people who believe that the Bush administration actually, knocked down the World Trade Center and actually set this all up so we could have wars. And, what you end up with is not, well, here is my evidence that leads me to these conclusions. It's, let me tear down the official story. And any official story about anything can be torn down if the questions are incredibly broad or incredibly minute. Because the idea of a conspiracy theorist is, if I can disprove this point, then therefore I am proving the vast conspiracy. And, the reality is, I mean, I've seen government in operation, I've been in the media in operation, and most of these organizations couldn't conspire to have lunch. I mean, they're just not that well organized.
The story is The Plots to Destroy America, the cover story of Newsweek, a recent Newsweek front page cover story. One of the quotes from that story: conspiracy theories have been woven into the fabric of American society since before the signing of the Constitution. But what was once dismissed as the amusing ravings of the tinfoil hat crowd has in recent years crossed a threshold, experts say, with delusions, fictions, and lunacy now strangling government policies and creating national health risks. What has changed about this country and the world that has made these conspiracy theories more dangerous these days?
Well, it's a lot of things. You have a much more rapid source of communication in the internet. You create environments where people can go in and get this endless feedback loop where their only information is coming from people who think like they do. And so, people who believe, let's do the 9/11 truthers again. People who believe in that 9/11 was an inside job go to sites where there are people who believe 9/11 was an inside job. And they sit there and they talk among themselves, and there's nobody to challenge it. There's nobody to say, wait a minute, there's this other fact. And the reality is that even when you do that with conspiracy theorists, they dismiss the other fact. But when you have that kind of information spreading faster, you end up with blocks of people who believe something. Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is very big among folks in, like, for example, in the Tea Party. That conspiracy theory has infiltrated the Tea Party. And so when you have a politician who is trying to win votes, they will talk about it. Ted Cruz has talked about it as being a real thing, as being, not Agenda 21 being a real thing, but the conspiracy being a real thing. And, does Ted Cruz really believe it? I think he's a smart man. I think he knows what it really is. But you do end up with a question of, is he truly buying into the idea that there is a vast New World Order conspiracy to destroy American property rights? Or is he just saying things he doesn't really believe to win votes?
We're talking with Kurt Eichenwald, a senior writer with Newsweek, previously worked for 20 years as a New York Times investigative reporter, here to talk about his piece, The Plots to Destroy America, about conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists. We'll take your calls and questions for about the next half hour or so here on the Washington Journal. Republicans can call it 202-585-3881. Democrats, 202-585-3880. Independents, 202-585-3882. And if you're outside the U.S., it's 202-585-3883. Let's go to Oklahoma first, where John's been waiting on our line for independence. John, good morning.
Good morning. I enjoyed your article. I read it in the Newsweek.
I do believe there is a conspiracy right in front of us at the present time. Hello?
Yeah, John, we can hear you.
I just wrote so many cities.
Okay.
And,
Oh, you were still talking, so I wanted. I believe
Turn down your TV, John.
I believe there's a conspiracy right in front of us at the present time.
John, turn down your TV and just go ahead with your question. We can hear you. You believe there's a conspiracy in front of us.
Yeah, the Democratic Party and the Catholic Church have a conspiracy to increase their enrollment. That's the reason the borders are wide open, and they're bringing people in from all over South America. There's 400 million people who live in South America. Probably 300 million of them are poverty-stricken and would like to come to America and get free welfare, free medical care, free education, free everything. Then they'll turn around and register as soon as they can and vote for the Democratic Party. And most of them who have religion are Catholics. They'll join the Catholic Church.
Kurt Eichenwald, we've been talking a lot about border issues today. Do you want to take on this topic from the point of your article?
Well, that's a great example of how a conspiracy theory starts. You'll notice one of the things that was missing there, it said, here's a fact, now let me explain the vast conspiracy. You don't start off saying, well, wait, there was a meeting, between Obama and the Catholic Church, and here's the evidence of what was discussed. It is simply taking a fact that there are a lot of refugees coming in from Latin America. Not a surprising event. It happens all over the world. There is a reason why it's happening now. Refugees exist when there are situations that are bad. Nobody's being let in and automatically granted citizenship and being put on welfare and all the rest of this. You had about 12 conspiracy theories in there, and no basis for any of them. The idea that somehow or other, the American government has gone off and secretly arranged to, lure children or bring children. I'm not exactly sure how, how the act is supposed to have been done, and get them to the border, and then, all these other things are going to happen. It's a creation of a belief surrounded, on top of a real fact. And all of that belief is based on this individual's political biases. He obviously doesn't like the Democrats. He obviously thinks the people who vote for Democrats are people who are on welfare and the rest. He obviously has a distrust of the Catholic Church. And all of those personal biases have fused together to go on top of an actual fact, refugees at the border, to build this vast conspiracy.
Liberty, Texas is next. CW's waiting on our line for Republicans. CW, good morning.
Hello, good morning. Proud tinfoil hat wearer here. Sir, my craft, I do metal fabrication, and when I don't do that, I'm usually working in the oil field. And if I'm told to cut corners or, if I willingly leave out material on a job, that sullies my name and that will blackball me from my field. So I chose to be a craftsman at that. But a lot of journalists today, and if that includes you, then so be it, are choosing to leave out the facts. The American people have bad news fatigue. God forbid we actually hear a good story from time to time. I don't believe every conspiracy out there, but I do believe people are conspiring as a larger plan. So today, if you go into the craft of journalism and you're told, oh, leave these facts out, don't say that, hell, Pravda from Russia has more credibility than the New York Times, in my opinion. And so that's why people seek out alternative other forms of information. Y'all have lost the information battle, and pretty soon, print media, all the Fox News, all that, it's all going down.
Eichenwald.
I hate to keep saying this. You'll notice there was one conspiracy theory in there, that journalists are being told to leave things out. I've never been told to leave anything out in my life. Unless I had something that was just sort of patently ridiculous. Yes, I've had that problem occasionally. I've never been told to leave anything out. I go off and I do my reporting, and I take that reporting and yes, we have standards. We have standards of what we can say. I have to have proven it. I can't just spin theory. I can't just say, I believe X, Y, Z. I have to have a document or people who are telling me, who are people in a position to know. You know, and people in a position to know don't have to be big authorities. You know, someone who's a secretary, someone who is, I mean, he was talking about being told to cut corners. Well, that actually can be an actual conspiracy. And I could talk to that gentleman, and, you know, if he's giving me information about how a particular organization is telling him to cut corners, that's a conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, and I'd be happy to write about it. But, you know, the press, the legitimate press cannot do what a bunch of folks sitting on the internet do. We have to actually depend on reporting, and reporting of, you know, events. And I'm not saying the internet does not have legitimate reporting. It does. There are legitimate news sites on the internet, but then there are also the fantastical news sites, and the sites where there is no reporting going on. It's just people taking bits and pieces of information and combining them all and then adding, you know, belief on top of it. And so, yeah, you're never going to get that kind of information coming from the legitimate news media, because that's just not what we do. Reporting is hard. It takes a long time. It takes standards. It takes a lot of, you know, practice in order to understand, you know, what is information that is provable and what isn't. This would be, speaking directly to this individual, this would be as if I said, yeah, you're a craftsman, but, you know, some guy who's off there banging a piece of wood or banging some metal, he does it much faster than you. And he gets things out there that you don't. And so of course he does, because he's not competent. And you're competent. You know how the job is done. You know, it's the same thing for journalists. There are journalists who know how the job is done, and there are journalists who don't.
As a journalist,
and the ones who don't.
As a journalist who's written about conspiracy theories, have you been accused of being part of the conspiracy yourself?
Oh yeah, of course. Ever since I wrote this piece, I've been accused of being, in fact, I even say that in the article, that the people I interviewed almost universally said, well, as soon as you write this, you know, you're going to be considered part of the conspiracy. And what's bizarre is that, you know, my career has been built on actually exposing conspiracies. You know, real things. Conspiracy theories and conspiracies are different beasts. Yes, you can have a theory that evolves into an actual conspiracy, but it starts off on the basis of fact and not supposition. There's a fact. There was a break-in at the Watergate Hotel, and one of the guys who was arrested was a consultant to the Nixon re-election campaign. Huh. Well, that gets you started down a path. You know, Agenda 21 was passed, and it's a non-binding agreement by the UN. Jumping from there to this vast new world order conspiracy, there's not a fact in between there. It's just a jump.
In our last 20 minutes or so, we'll try to get to as many of your calls as we can as we talk to Newsweek's Kurt Eichenwald. Rick is up next in Rockwall, Texas, on our line for Democrats. Rick, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Kurt, good morning, sir. I've got a couple of points, if you'll let me make them, please.
Go ahead, Rick. We're listening.
As someone with a master's in international policy, 10 years with the United Nations, currently working for a nonprofit on the border, I can tell you that a conspiracy is whenever the government and their agents like yourself don't tell the truth to the American people. We don't have the tax base to support our overspending and our debt as a nation. We need new immigrants. Why not tell the truth? You're not telling the truth. The administration is not telling the truth. I work for the ILO, UNDP, other organizations within the UN. Agenda 21 is a fact. The planet is under stress right now. We have overpopulation. There are too many people, and the UN, with the cooperation of all governments in the world is trying to do something about it. And part of what they're trying to do is control population, help the environment. It is all facts. You have lost your credibility by spinning the story, whether it's your personal agenda or a political view that you hold. And by not being truthful with the people who can see what's really going on, you lose your credibility.
Drakenwald, do you want to respond?
Well, it's interesting because he was saying, these things are not being told. We need to expand our tax base. Immigration helps expand our tax base. I've read the articles about that. We are saying that. It doesn't apply to every single person who shows up at the border, and the circumstances with the kids, the refugees who are coming, creates there are a lot of different issues created there, and it's not always just, well, let's now just talk about immigration and building the tax base, which again are all very true points. Agenda 21 is a real thing. But I seriously doubt this fellow believes that Americans are about to be loaded into rail cars and taken off into work camps, which is one of the arguments by the people opposing Agenda 21. When you're actually able to talk about what Agenda 21 is and what the purpose is and what the UN is trying to accomplish and what powers it has to accomplish it, that's perfectly legitimate, and that story is being told. But the problem is that reality has been subsumed into a conspiracy theory based on nothing. And so, when you have the Agenda 21 boogeyman being used to stop, the adoption of a bike path, or, in Maine, there was a highway project that was intended to decrease traffic, that ended up getting shelved because of Agenda 21. Not the legitimate Agenda 21, the conspiracy theory Agenda 21. Then you're dealing with that problem. But everything else you're talking about, these are stories that are told. There's no hiding them. There's no secret. It's just then a matter of policy debate. And I'm perfectly happy when people have policy debates. I'm not happy when people have policy debates where half the argument is about a fantasy. And by the way, an agent, the people I'm the agent of, I'm the agent of no one. I work for Newsweek, that's it. And my job is to write an interesting story.
Noblesville, Indiana is next as we discuss your recent story, The Plots to Destroy America, cover story in a recent edition of Newsweek about conspiracy theories, conspiracy theorists. So we'll go to Karen in Indiana on our line for Independence. Karen, good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for taking my call. I just had a question on the conspiracy of the Trilateral Commission. I have a booklet from back in '73 that my father received from Senator Lugar. You can no longer get these booklets. And in that booklet, it says, in this global effort, the industrialized democratic regions remain unidentifiable community and vital core. Their focus, however, must not be on the preservation of the status quo, but on arrangements which increasingly embrace the third and fourth worlds in a cooperative endeavor to source a more equitable world order. So my question to you is, we never hear about the Trilateral Commission, and this shows how our country is going towards that, getting rid of our status quo and increasing us with third and fourth world orders in the way our country is.
Mr. Eichenwald.
Well, first of all, Senator Lugar was a true statesman and a very smart man, and I think having lost him in the Senate was a real shame, real loss. What you had there was a statement of something that was, a very coherent statement of the reality of modern economies that had the words world order in it, which is unfortunate because those words are now buzzwords for conspiracy. We are in a global economy. Nothing will stop that. We are in a circumstance where, because we're a global economy, what happens in third and fourth world countries actually affect the global economy. Nothing can stop that. You know, the world has changed dramatically because of improved communications, improved transportation, you know, different demands, the spread of demand for, you know, the benefits of both leisure and wealth. And if you try and pretend that only the industrialized nations are part of that economy, then you're outside of reality. And so what Senator Lugar was talking about was modern economic reality. Actually, that's sounds like it's from a decade or so ago. And it wasn't a conspiracy. Now, do we hear about the Trilateral Commission? Yeah, we hear about it all the time from conspiracy theorists who believe it is some vast, dark organization engaged in, you know, all this subterfuge. But no one's ever able to actually give here's evidence of what they've done. It's an organization that is involved in, you know, basically policy analysis and implementation.
You're right.
And that's it.
You write in your piece that there's been research into people who believe in conspiracy theories. What does the research tell us?
The research is almost is one of these things where what you expect to read doesn't turn out to be true. The most interesting thing is that conspiracy theorists are more likely than others to be able to hold contradictory thoughts in their heads at the same time. Meaning the ones they checked were people who believed that Princess Diana was murdered are more likely to believe that she's still alive. People who believe that Osama bin Laden was dead before the SEAL team went in and shot him are also more likely to believe that he escaped alive. Those, you know, it's sort of hard to comprehend how people can believe the exact opposite things, but that's what the research shows. And that I mean, there's a lot of different things from the research. You know, if you believe one conspiracy theory, you're more likely to believe 2 or 3 or 4. And so, you know, but it's also what's interesting is that when you have someone who believes a conspiracy theory and then you present evidence to the contrary. One great example, the Sarah Palin's thing about death panels being in the Obamacare law, which they aren't, and they never were. And what you have is, what they had was something called end-of-life counseling, which I could get into, but that's, you know. And when they did study on that, they asked people, they had people who hated Sarah Palin, loved Sarah Palin, didn't care either way. And all of them had heard death panels, all of them thought it was real, then they were presented with evidence. The ones who hated Sarah Palin went, oh, so it wasn't true. The ones who were neither here nor there about Sarah Palin, oh, it wasn't true. The ones who loved Sarah Palin doubled down. It's true, and here's why that's a lie, and you're part of a conspiracy. And so it ended up that when you gave them evidence to the contrary, they believed the original theory even more. So it's all these interesting things that just go to the nature of the fact that it's very hard to break a conspiracy theory.
Linda is up next, calling in from California on our line for Republicans. Linda, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for receiving my call. I have 2 conspiracy that I think. I'm thinking about these children. I know, you know, we have compassion for these children, but I think the Republicans and Democrats are working together to bring these children in here. Now, I don't know if these kids are pods. You know, 10 years from now, they're going to be walking around with bombs or what. But we need to be more careful about this, about these children. They need to be processed, and we need to know where they are, and they need to be sent back home. I know when they go home, there's going to be more coming, but they need to go back home because if we can't control our own borders, we don't have the right to try to go around and tell other countries what to do. And then about this flu shot, I've never had a flu shot, and I don't think that people should have flu shots because I think in the next 10 years or 15 years, those people that have taken those flu shots are going to die.
Mr. Egenwald, you've already talked about some of the border issues. Can you take on the flu shots comments that you made?
Yeah, let's start off with the I think. Fine, you think. Do you have a medical study that shows something about a flu shot is going, that people who have flu shots are going to die? I've had flu shots for decades, and here I am on TV. Why are people who have flu shots going to die? The other thing to bear in mind here is that there are people who dedicate their lives to particular issues. There are people who spend their lives, developing means of fighting disease. They go to schools. They train. It takes years and years and years, and then they spend decades doing the research, and they develop ways that prevent illness. I mean, we had the 1918 flu that killed unbelievable numbers of people because we didn't have vaccines back then. And now we do, and we may have one of these kinds of flus come around again, and hopefully we'll be better protected. But, you have these people who've done the work to get us there, and then I seriously doubt that, the person who called in is somebody who has done years of medical research, years of scientific research, spent time in the lab, and has a basis for her decision other than this is what I think and I read something on the internet. And, I tend to believe science is difficult. I'm not a scientist, but I do read science and I do talk to scientists, and science is difficult. And when people are willing to make vast scientific conclusions without even having done actual medical research, I don't mean looking stuff up on the internet, I mean actual medical research of, information that has been, published, real studies, and published in a peer-reviewed journal, people are just spinning stories. They can believe whatever they want, but it doesn't mean that it's real.
Got just a few minutes left with Kurt Eichenwald of Newsweek. Riverside, California is next. Randy is on our line for Democrats. Randy, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, C-SPAN listeners. I just want to thank Brian Ram and C-SPAN for finally putting on something about the 9/11 commission. Your guest yesterday. Because I know in the past, I've been looking at C-SPAN since, by accident, since the William Kennedy Smith trial. And, it's just refreshing to see that, you put this guy on yesterday when a person used to call in and mention 9/11. You guys would just shut them down. I loved the show yesterday. Please do more of them. Thank you. Bye.
Mr. Eichenwald, the caller was talking about one of our segments yesterday that featured Richard Gage, the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I want to play you a clip from that show yesterday and give you a chance to respond to some of the comments that Mr. Gage makes.
You have to see the evidence to have an informed opinion. When they do, they end up agreeing with us. I think that's extremely important. It's also telling, why are they not informed? Why hasn't other media outlets such as CNN, MSNBC, CBS, etc., shown the World Trade Center Building 7 to the American people? Why haven't the American Society of Civil Engineers and the American Institute of Architects educated their own professionals about the third worst structural failure in modern history? Why are they so uninformed? I think these questions are extremely important as well.
Mr. Eichenwald, what do you take away from that short clip from yesterday's program?
I always like it when people say, why aren't people informed? I've read engineering reports about this. What's interesting is when you get right down to it, how mundane the nature of the reports are. They are very technical, but they go down to things like weight distributions and the structure of supports and how when you remove this item or have that event take place, you have a distribution of weight that causes the probability. I mean, it goes on and on like this, and it's not as exciting and sexy as some conspiracy to knock down a building. Why they needed to knock down Building 7, I don't know, but it seemed like the first two did enough. But in the end, not everything is a conspiracy. Some things just are what they appear to be, and that usually tends to be the reality of things. Always the best question to ask is why? Why would this conspiracy take place? Why would people, think they could get away with it? Just on the buildings. Why would they try to knock down buildings to start a war? You don't need to knock down buildings to start a war. You could have had a terrorist attack of any level. You didn't have to destroy major architectural buildings. Why would the United States agree to surrender property rights? Well, you have to create this vast conspiracy of people, but they don't exist. Why would the drug companies fight to create an environment where people are, intentionally being harmed? Why? And I'm sure people are out there now yelling at the screen for the money, but it's like there are not drug companies. There are tens of thousands of people who work in these companies. If something like this was going on, I promise you, someone would be blowing the whistle. Again, I've written about real conspiracies for decades, and that's how you find out about them, is there are people who are morally outraged about something and who talk. Now we're talking about vast conspiracies that are killing and maiming and harming tens of thousands of people, supposedly. They're not true. And nobody of any credibility is blowing the whistle. Nobody's coming in with the documents. Nobody's coming in and saying, here is proof of what I'm trying to say. It's just stuff people are saying.
Kurt Eichenwald is a senior writer with Newsweek. He's been talking about his story, The Plots to Destroy America, in the May 15th edition of Newsweek. We appreciate you joining us this morning. And if you want to catch up with Kurt Eichenwald on Twitter, it's at Kurt Eichenwald. Thanks so much, Mr. Eichenwald.
Thanks for having me.
On the next Washington Journal, Alex Nicholson with the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. He discusses the passage of a bill that would give $16 billion to improve service at Veterans Affairs hospitals.